The Expendables, 2010, is best understood not simply as another mercenary action movie, but as a deliberate celebration of the action cinema that dominated the late 1980s and early 1990s. Sylvester Stallone uses the film to bring together a group of performers who, in different ways, helped define the era of muscular heroes, explosive set pieces, one-liners, martial arts spectacle, and larger-than-life villains. At the same time, the movie gives those familiar stars a slightly older, more reflective identity. They are no longer invincible young heroes at the beginning of their careers. They are veterans who understand violence, recognize its costs, and continue doing dangerous work because it is what they know. The Expendables as a celebration of classic action cinema. Released in 2010, The Expendables arrived at an interesting moment in Hollywood. Action cinema had changed considerably since the peak years of stars such as Stallone, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Bruce Willis, Jean-Claude Van Damme, Dolph Lundgren, and others. Modern action movies were increasingly influenced by faster editing, digital effects, superhero franchises, and more sophisticated visual technology. Stallone's idea was almost the cinematic equivalent of assembling an all-star team. Instead of creating an entirely new generation of action heroes, he gathered several recognizable figures from different corners of the genre. The result was intentionally excessive. The cast itself becomes part of the entertainment. Jason Statham represents the modern evolution of the action star. Jet Li brings martial arts credibility. Dolph Lundgren recalls the imposing physical villains and heroes of the 1980s. Randy Couture brings genuine combat sports experience. Terry Crews adds explosive physical comedy and firepower. Steve Austin contributes his professional wrestling toughness. Mickey Rourke supplies emotional weight. Bruce Willis appears as one of the most recognizable action stars in Hollywood history. And at the center is Sylvester Stallone. Stallone's role as Barney Ross is important because Ross is not presented as an ordinary superhero. He is a professional mercenary who has spent years making difficult decisions. His team is extremely capable, but their profession has consequences. That distinction gives the movie more character depth than its reputation as an explosion-heavy action film might suggest. Sylvester Stallone's role as director and star. Stallone did more than simply act in The Expendables. He directed the movie and co-wrote the screenplay with David Callahan. This makes the project particularly personal. Stallone had already established himself as one of the defining figures of action cinema through movies such as Rocky, Rambo, First Blood Part 2, Rambo 3, and other films that turned him into an international star. By 2010, however, he was no longer the young action hero audiences remembered from the 1980s. The Expendables acknowledges that reality. Barney Ross is physically powerful, but there is also weariness in him. He leads people who are dangerous professionals, yet he is constantly aware that one mistake can get someone killed. This gives Stallone's performance a different quality from his younger action roles. The character does not need to prove that he is the strongest man in the room. He is already the leader. His authority comes from experience. That is particularly important in his relationship with Lee Christmas, played by Jason Statham. Christmas is younger, aggressive, confident, and emotionally intense. Ross, by contrast, has learned to control his emotions. Their relationship therefore creates a generational contrast inside the team. Ross understands that leadership means accepting responsibility for other people's lives. Jason Statham as Lee Christmas. Jason Statham's presence is one of the major reasons the movie remains energetic. Lee Christmas is a knife specialist and one of Barney Ross's closest allies. Statham's fighting style makes him feel different from Stallone. Where Stallone's action persona traditionally emphasizes overwhelming physical power, Statham's persona is based more heavily on speed, precision, confidence, and controlled aggression. Christmas is also one of the more emotionally expressive members of the team. His relationship with Lacey gives the character a personal vulnerability. When Lacey becomes involved with another man, Christmas takes the situation personally. His anger creates an interesting contrast with the professional discipline he demonstrates during missions. This makes him more than simply the team's knife expert. He is a man whose personal life is unstable while his professional identity is remarkably controlled. Statham also brings humor to the film. His chemistry with Stallone helps prevent the story from becoming relentlessly grim. Their conversations feel like two experienced professionals who trust each other but are also comfortable challenging one another. Jet Li and the martial arts dimension. Jet Li plays Yin Yang, a compact but highly skilled member of the Expendables. The character's name itself reflects his martial arts identity, but the important element is what Li brings physically to the ensemble. The Expendables is constructed around different action traditions. Stallone represents the classic muscular action hero. Statham represents modern British action cinema. Lundgren represents the imposing physicality associated with 1980s action movies. Jet Li represents martial arts cinema. His fighting scenes allow the film to change rhythm. Instead of relying only on firearms and explosions, the movie occasionally becomes a showcase for hand-to-hand combat. Yin Yang's physical size compared with some of his teammates is also part of the joke. He does not look like the strongest person in the group, but appearances are misleading. The film repeatedly establishes that skill matters as much as size. That principle is central to martial arts cinema, and Li's presence gives the ensemble another dimension. Dolph Lundgren as Gunnar Jensen. Dolph Lundgren's Gunnar Jensen is one of the more complicated characters. At first glance, Gunnar seems to be exactly what audiences might expect from Lundgren, a huge, physically intimidating fighter who is comfortable with violence. But the character is also unstable. His behavior suggests that the mercenary lifestyle has affected him psychologically. He struggles with discipline and eventually becomes a liability for the team. This is important because The Expendables does not portray its mercenaries as perfectly functioning superheroes. They have weaknesses. They have personal problems. They can make bad decisions. And some of them are damaged by the world in which they operate. Gunnar therefore becomes an example of what Barney's team could become if discipline and loyalty disappear. His conflict with the others also gives the movie an internal source of tension. Mickey Rourke and the emotional center. Mickey Rourke's Tool is one of the most interesting characters because he is not primarily defined by action. Tool is a former member of the Expendables who now operates the team's tattoo shop and serves as an experienced advisor. His conversations with Barney provide the movie with its emotional and philosophical dimension. The character understands what violence does to people. His famous story about a woman he failed to save is especially important because it reveals the guilt beneath the macho exterior of the movie. Tool represents the possibility of reflection. Barney and his teammates can shoot, fight, and survive impossible situations, but they cannot completely escape the emotional consequences of their profession. Rourke's performance is deliberately restrained. Instead of turning Tool into another explosive action character, the movie allows him to sit, talk, remember, and regret. That contrast is valuable. Without Tool, The Expendables could easily become a collection of explosions connected by dialogue. With Tool, the film occasionally pauses to ask whether being good at violence is actually something worth celebrating. The mission in Valina. The main story begins when Barney Ross and Lee Christmas are hired to investigate a mission involving the fictional island nation of Valina. Their objective is connected to General Garza, the country's dictator. Initially, the assignment appears relatively straightforward: identify the target and determine whether the Expendables can complete the job. But the situation quickly becomes more complicated. Barney discovers that Garza is not necessarily the true source of power. Instead, the island's political structure is being manipulated by former CIA operative James Monroe. This transforms the mission from a simple assassination or regime change operation into something more complicated. The Expendables are not merely fighting a dictator. They are fighting a system of corruption. General Garza as the puppet dictator. General Garza initially appears to be the traditional action movie dictator. He controls an island through military force and fear. But the film gradually reveals that his position is more complicated. Garza is being manipulated by Monroe, who has turned political power into a criminal enterprise. This is one of the movie's central themes: the visible villain is not necessarily the real villain. Garza represents authority. Monroe represents exploitation. The distinction matters because the film ultimately suggests that removing one man from power does not automatically solve a larger problem. The real threat is the person who benefits from the system. James Monroe and corruption. Eric Roberts' James Monroe functions as the film's principal villain. Unlike a purely physical villain, Monroe's power comes from intelligence, influence, and manipulation. His background as a former CIA operative makes him particularly dangerous because he understands how covert operations work. He knows how governments operate. He knows how mercenaries think. And he understands how to manipulate people. This makes him a fitting opponent for Barney. Barney is a professional soldier for hire who operates outside conventional political structures. Monroe is also operating outside conventional morality, but he uses power and influence rather than loyalty. The conflict therefore becomes a battle between two kinds of professional violence. One side has a code. The other side has only profit. Barney Ross and the moral question. One of the most interesting aspects of Barney's character is his reluctance to accept the mission once he understands what is happening. The Expendables are mercenaries. They are not traditional heroes. They take dangerous jobs for money. Yet Barney still possesses a moral boundary. That contradiction is fundamental to the film. If Barney were simply a ruthless killer, the story would have very little emotional complexity. Instead, he struggles with the consequences of his choices. He recognizes that some missions are morally questionable. He worries about innocent people being caught in the middle. He also becomes increasingly concerned about Sandra, General Garza's daughter. Sandra changes the nature of the mission. Initially, Barney is looking at Valina as a job. Eventually, he begins seeing the people living there as individuals. That is an important transformation. Sandra and the human side of the story. Sandra, played by Giselle Iti, is one of the most important figures because she gives the audience a connection to the civilians trapped within the political conflict. She is not simply a hostage waiting to be rescued. She has her own moral position and her own connection to Valina. Sandra's relationship with Barney also helps expose his softer side. The contrast is striking. Barney can walk into a heavily armed compound and remain calm. But when he sees what is happening to innocent people, his emotional defenses begin to weaken. This is where the movie's title becomes meaningful. The Expendables are people who can be treated as disposable by those who hire them. But the film gradually argues that human beings should never truly be considered expendable. The importance of the team. The film's greatest strength is arguably its ensemble structure. Each character has a different specialty. Barney is the leader. Christmas is the knife expert. Yin Yang specializes in martial arts. Gunnar brings heavy physical power. Hail Caesar, played by Terry Crews, is a weapons specialist. Toll Road, played by Randy Couture, is another strong combatant. Together they operate like a highly specialized military unit. But their greatest strength is not simply firepower. It is loyalty. The team members repeatedly put themselves at risk for one another. This is especially important in the final act. The mission stops being about money. It becomes personal. Terry Crews and Hail Caesar. Terry Crews brings enormous energy to Hail Caesar. His physical presence fits perfectly into the exaggerated world of the Expendables. But Crews also contributes comedy. His oversized weapon becomes part of the film's visual identity. Caesar embodies one of the movie's central principles: more is more. More guns. More ammunition. More explosions. More muscles. More action stars. The film does not attempt to hide its excessiveness. It embraces it. Randy Couture as Toll Road. Randy Couture brings authentic combat experience to the team. His presence adds credibility to the physical combat sequences. Toll Road is also a more understated character. Unlike some of the louder personalities, he often operates as a dependable member of the group. That makes him useful dramatically. Not every character needs to dominate the screen. Some characters exist to make the team feel like a functioning organization. Toll Road contributes to that sense of professionalism. Bruce Willis and Arnold Schwarzenegger's famous appearance. One of the film's most memorable moments is the brief meeting involving Barney Ross, Bruce Willis's Mr. Church, and Arnold Schwarzenegger's Trench Mauser. This scene became famous largely because of what it represented outside the story. Stallone, Willis, and Schwarzenegger were three of the biggest symbols of Hollywood action cinema. Seeing them together was almost like watching an entire era of action movies collide in one scene. The sequence is short, but culturally it is enormously significant. The dialogue plays with their screen identities. Each man knows the audience understands who they are. The scene therefore operates on two levels. Inside the movie, these are powerful professionals discussing a mission. Outside the movie, viewers are watching three legendary action stars sharing the screen. It is fan service, but deliberately so. The action philosophy of the Expendables. The action sequences are intentionally old-fashioned. The movie favors practical-looking explosions, gunfire, physical stunts, and direct confrontation. It is not primarily interested in making violence realistic. Instead, it aims to make violence spectacular. That is a crucial distinction. The Expendables belongs to the tradition of action cinema in which the hero can survive extraordinary punishment and continue fighting. The characters are exaggerated. The villains are exaggerated. The weapons are exaggerated. The destruction is exaggerated. That is part of the appeal. The movie is not asking the audience to believe that this is exactly how real-world mercenary operations function. It is asking them to enjoy the fantasy. The final assault. The climax brings the film's major themes together. The Expendables return to Valina to confront Monroe and his forces. At this point, the mission is no longer simply professional. It has become a matter of loyalty, morality, and revenge. The team attacks with overwhelming force. The final battle is constructed as a showcase for the individual personalities. Each member gets opportunities to demonstrate his particular skill. There are gunfights, hand-to-hand combat, explosions, vehicle sequences, and close-range confrontations. The climax deliberately resembles the action films of an earlier era. Rather than building toward a complicated technological solution, the movie builds toward physical confrontation. The heroes solve the problem by going directly into danger. Why critics gave the movie mixed reviews? The Expendables received mixed critical reactions. One reason is that the film's greatest strength is also its greatest weakness. Its nostalgic approach can be extremely entertaining for viewers who enjoy classic action movies. But viewers looking for sophisticated storytelling may find the plot relatively conventional. The characters are introduced quickly. Some receive more development than others. The political storyline is functional rather than deeply explored. The film's dialogue sometimes intentionally embraces action movie cliches. The violence is exaggerated. The narrative occasionally feels secondary to the spectacle. But that criticism misses part of what Stallone was trying to accomplish. The movie was not designed as a realistic political thriller. It was designed as a celebration of action cinema, commercial success and the beginning of a franchise. Despite its mixed reviews, The Expendables became a commercial success. It grossed approximately $274 million worldwide, establishing enough momentum for the story to continue. The success demonstrated that audiences were still interested in seeing veteran action stars in major theatrical action movies. The film was followed by The Expendables 2 in 2012, The Expendables 3 in 2014, and Expendables in 2023. The first movie therefore served as the foundation for an entire franchise. Its most important achievement may not be the complexity of its story. Its importance lies in the concept. Stallone proved that an action movie could function as an ensemble reunion for an entire generation of action performers. The deeper meaning of the title. The word expendable is particularly appropriate. A mercenary is hired to perform dangerous work because the employer is willing to accept the possibility that the mercenary may die. In that sense, the characters are literally expendable. But the movie gradually challenges that idea. Barney does not treat his teammates as disposable. He cares about them. They care about one another. Their loyalty transforms them from hired guns into a family. That is why the final mission carries emotional weight. They are willing to risk themselves because one of their own has become involved in something larger than a paycheck. The title therefore contains an ironic idea. Society may consider these men expendable, but they refuse to consider each other that way. Final assessment. The Expendables is ultimately a movie about action heroes looking back at the action genre that created them. Its greatest appeal comes from its cast, its explosive set pieces, its humor, and its commitment to old-school action spectacle. Stallone's direction and performance establish the movie's identity, while Jason Statham supplies youthful intensity, Jet Li adds martial arts expertise, Dolph Lundgren provides imposing physicality and instability, Terry Crews brings comic energy and firepower, Randy Couture adds combat authenticity, and Mickey Rourke provides the emotional dimension. The appearances of Bruce Willis and Arnold Schwarzenegger make the movie feel like a reunion of an entire cinematic generation. The story itself is straightforward. A team of elite mercenaries enters Valina, discovers that a dictator is being manipulated by a corrupt former CIA operative, and ultimately decides to fight for something more meaningful than money. But beneath that simple plot is a surprisingly important idea. These men have spent their lives being weapons. They know how to fight. They know how to kill. They know how to survive. Yet the movie suggests that their humanity is defined not by their ability to destroy people, but by their willingness to protect one another. That is why the film's strongest moments are not necessarily the biggest explosions. They are the moments when the characters demonstrate loyalty. The Expendables may not have satisfied every critic looking for a sophisticated screenplay, but it succeeded at something much more specific. It recreated the spirit of the muscular, star-driven action movie and transformed the casting itself into an event. In 2010, audiences were not simply watching Stallone, Statham, Lee, Lundgren, Couture, Crews, Rourke, Willis, and Schwarzenegger as individual performers. They were watching different generations of action cinema collide. That is the real identity of The Expendables, a loud, violent, nostalgic, deliberately excessive celebration of the action heroes who once ruled Hollywood, and a reminder that, even when the genre changes, audiences never completely lose their appetite for larger-than-life heroes, impossible missions, explosive battles, and a team that refuses to leave one of its own behind. The Expendables, a team built for dangerous jobs. The Expendables are an elite group of mercenaries based in New Orleans. Their leader is Barney Ross, played by Sylvester Stallone. Around him is a group of specialists who each bring a different skill to the team. Lee Christmas, played by Jason Statham, is the blade specialist. Yin Yang, played by Jet Li, is the martial artist. Gunnar Jensen, played by Dolph Lundgren, is the chemical engineer and heavy fighter. Hail Caesar, played by Terry Crews, is the team's weapons specialist. Toll Road, played by Randy Couture, is the demolitions expert. The team is designed almost like a collection of specialized weapons. Each person has a role, but their greatest advantage comes from working together. This is important because the film does not introduce them as ordinary friends. They are professionals who have developed a strange kind of family through years of dangerous work. They trust each other with their lives. That relationship becomes increasingly important as the story progresses. The opening mission in the Gulf of Aden immediately demonstrates what the Expendables are capable of doing. They are not government soldiers operating under official orders. They are mercenaries, meaning they accept assignments that ordinary military forces may not be willing or able to undertake. Their first mission involves rescuing hostages from Somali pirates. On paper, this is a simple rescue operation. In practice, it becomes a demonstration of the team's methods. The Gulf of Aden rescue mission. The film begins with the Expendables arriving at a vessel controlled by Somali pirates. The situation is dangerous because hostages are being held by armed criminals, and the Expendables must eliminate the threat without allowing the hostages to be killed. Barney and his team approach the situation with the confidence of people who have performed similar operations many times before. The scene establishes the tone of the movie immediately. There is gunfire, intimidation, physical combat, and dark humor. The team does not behave like ordinary action heroes who are surprised by violence. Violence is their profession. This is one of the defining characteristics of the Expendables. The movie's characters have become so accustomed to danger that extraordinary situations sometimes appear routine to them. Yet the mission also exposes one of the biggest problems within the team. Gunnar Jensen. Gunnar Jensen's dangerous instability. Gunnar is physically intimidating and extremely capable, but he is also unpredictable. During the confrontation with the pirates, Gunnar becomes excessively violent. Instead of simply neutralizing the threat, he begins treating the pirates as objects of personal revenge. His behavior crosses a moral line when he tries to hang one of the captured pirates. That moment is extremely important because it tells us something about Gunnar that his physical appearance alone cannot communicate. He is not simply a tough man. He is a man who has trouble controlling the violent instincts that his profession has encouraged. The other members of the team recognize the danger. Yin Yang intervenes. Barney and the others also discourage Gunnar from continuing. The confrontation demonstrates that the Expendables have a code. They may be killers, but they are not supposed to be sadistic killers. There is a difference between eliminating an enemy during combat and deliberately torturing someone who has already been defeated. Gunnar's actions threaten that distinction. Barney's leadership. Barney Ross is therefore forced to make a difficult decision. He dismisses Gunnar from the team. This decision tells us a great deal about Barney. He is not simply the strongest member of the group. He is the person responsible for maintaining discipline. A leader cannot allow one unstable member to endanger everyone else. Barney's decision also establishes the central moral tension of his character. He leads a team of mercenaries, yet he still believes in rules. That contradiction is at the heart of the Expendables. These characters earn money through violence, but they do not necessarily believe that everything is permitted simply because they are paid to do it. Barney's leadership therefore depends on restraint. He understands violence better than most people, but he also understands that uncontrolled violence can destroy the people using it. Gunnar does not understand that distinction. At least not yet. Lee Christmas and his personal problems. After the opening mission, the film shifts toward the personal lives of the characters. Lee Christmas discovers that his girlfriend, Lacey, has left him for another man. This might seem like a small subplot compared with international political conspiracies, but it is actually very important. Christmas is a man who is extremely confident when facing armed enemies. He can walk into a dangerous situation carrying knives and remain calm. But his emotional life is much less controlled. This contrast makes him human. A man can be fearless in combat and still be vulnerable when dealing with love. Christmas's heartbreak also creates opportunities for the movie's humor. The Expendables frequently moves between brutal action and comedy because its characters are larger-than-life figures. Christmas is particularly suited to this approach because Jason Statham's screen presence allows him to be both intimidating and funny. His relationship problems also establish a theme that continues throughout the movie. These men are much less successful at dealing with ordinary life than they are at dealing with violence. They know how to survive wars. They do not necessarily know how to maintain relationships. The meeting with Mr. Church. The story then introduces a new mission. Barney and Trench Mauser, played by Arnold Schwarzenegger, meet a mysterious figure known as Mr. Church, played by Bruce Willis. The meeting is one of the film's most memorable sequences because it brings together three major action stars. But within the story, the meeting is also significant because it introduces the next assignment. Mr. Church wants a team to travel to Valina and overthrow General Gaza. Trench is initially considered for the job, but he passes it to Barney. This establishes the professional rivalry between Barney and Trench. They are both extremely capable men. Neither needs to prove himself. Their conversation therefore has a relaxed confidence. The characters behave like veterans who have spent years in the same dangerous world. For audiences, however, the scene carries another layer of meaning. Stallone, Schwarzenegger, and Willis represent different pillars of action cinema. Their interaction feels like an acknowledgement of Hollywood history. The mission to Valina. The assignment appears simple. The Expendables must help remove General Garza from power. Valina is presented as an unstable island nation controlled by a dictator. Barney initially views the mission as another job. That attitude is important because mercenaries survive by separating emotion from professional responsibility. They cannot become emotionally attached to every mission. If they did, they would constantly put themselves at risk. Barney therefore approaches Valina cautiously. He and Christmas travel to the island to conduct reconnaissance. This is not yet the final assault. They need to understand the political environment, identify their target, and determine whether the mission is actually possible. Their contact is Sandra. And Sandra changes everything. Sandra, the human face of the conflict. Sandra is not merely an intelligence contact. She is eventually revealed to be the daughter of General Garza. This discovery transforms the mission. Barney begins to understand that the political situation is far more complicated than the initial briefing suggested. General Garza appears to be the dictator. But the real power behind the operation is James Monroe. Monroe is a former CIA officer who has become corrupt. He is using Garza as a figurehead while exploiting Valina for his own financial interests. This means the political conflict is essentially a disguise for criminal profiteering. Garza appears to be the villain from the outside. But Monroe is the person benefiting from the situation. James Monroe and the real villain. James Monroe is important because he represents corruption from within the system. He is not an outsider who simply hates America or wants world domination. He is a former CIA operative. He understands intelligence operations. He understands covert missions. He knows how governments hide their actions. And he uses that knowledge for personal profit. This makes him particularly dangerous. Monroe is not simply powerful because he has weapons. He is powerful because he understands the machinery of power. He can manipulate General Garza while protecting himself through political connections. This creates an uncomfortable situation for the CIA. If Monroe is exposed publicly, the agency could suffer enormous embarrassment. Therefore, the problem cannot simply be handled openly. The mission has to remain deniable. This is where the meaning of Mr. Church's assignment begins to change. Barney aborts the mission. After Barney and Christmas are discovered during their reconnaissance, Barney decides to abort the mission. From a purely professional standpoint, his decision makes sense. The situation is more dangerous than expected. They have been compromised. Their contact is connected directly to the dictator. One of the darkest developments occurs when Monroe has Sandra waterboarded for information. This scene demonstrates Monroe's brutality. It also reveals how far he is willing to go to protect his interests. Sandra is not treated as a human being. She is treated as a source of information. Monroe's actions therefore establish the moral difference between him and Barney's team. The Expendables use violence, but Barney repeatedly shows concern about unnecessary cruelty. Monroe has no such limitation. For him, people are tools. Garza's anger at Sandra's treatment also increases the tension between the dictator and Monroe. The partnership is beginning to collapse. Gunner joins Monroe. Meanwhile, Gunner approaches Monroe. This is the consequence of Barney's decision to dismiss him. Gunner feels rejected. Instead of reconsidering his behavior, he seeks employment elsewhere. Monroe is willing to use him. This is an important development because Gunner becomes an example of what happens when a mercenary loses his moral connection to his team. Barney's team has loyalty. Monroe's organization has money and power. Gunner temporarily chooses the latter. His betrayal is especially significant because he knows the Expendables. He knows how they think. He knows their strengths. And he knows their weaknesses. That makes him a dangerous opponent. Lacey's abuse. The story then returns to Lee Christmas. Christmas discovers that Lacey has been physically abused by her new partner. This completely changes the emotional situation. Earlier, Christmas was angry because Lacey had left him. Now his anger becomes protective. He confronts the man responsible. Christmas beats him and his friends. During the confrontation, he reveals what he does for a living. This scene is important because it shows the difference between Christmas's personal and professional violence. In combat, he kills because that is his job. Here, he uses violence because someone he cares about has been harmed. The movie does not present this as a morally uncomplicated situation. Christmas is still using brutal force. But his motivation is no longer money. It is loyalty. That same principle will later motivate the entire team. The reveal about Mr. Church. Barney and the team eventually discover the truth about Mr. Church. Church is connected to the CIA. The mission is not simply about removing General Garza. The real objective is James Monroe. Monroe has gone rogue. He is using Garza and Valina to control drug money that should have benefited the CIA's operations. The agency cannot openly send its own people to assassinate a former operative because the political consequences would be disastrous. Therefore, they need outsiders. They need mercenaries. They need people whose actions can be denied. This explains why Barney and the Expendables were selected. They are essentially disposable assets. That idea connects directly to the film's title. The Expendables are useful precisely because the people hiring them can deny responsibility if things go wrong. The meaning of being expendable. The term expendable, therefore, has both a literal and symbolic meaning. These men are willing to risk their lives. Their employers are willing to sacrifice them. But the movie gradually challenges the idea that they are truly disposable. Barney cares about his team. Christmas cares about Barney. The other members care about one another. Their friendship gives them value beyond their usefulness as weapons. This is one of the reasons the movie's emotional scenes matter. Without these relationships, the action would feel empty. The audience needs to understand why these men are willing to die for one another. Barney's conversation with Tool. Perhaps the most emotionally significant section of the story involves Barney's meeting with Tool. Tool is a tattoo artist and former member of the Expendables. Unlike the active mercenaries, Tool has stepped away from the violence. He serves as a reminder of what life after the battlefield might look like. Barney visits him because he is struggling emotionally. The mission in Valina has affected him. Sandra has affected him. His responsibilities have affected him. And Barney is beginning to question whether he is capable of doing anything meaningful with his life. Tool understands this because he has experienced his own moral failure. Tool's confession. Tool tells Barney about a woman he once encountered. She was contemplating suicide. Tool could have intervened. He could have tried to save her. Instead, he allowed her to die. That memory has stayed with him. This confession is one of the most important moments in the movie because it gives the film a moral dimension that the explosions cannot provide. Tool's story is about regret. He cannot change what happened. He cannot go back and save her. All he can do is live with the memory. This becomes a warning for Barney. Barney has a choice. He can walk away from Valina and tell himself that the mission is too dangerous. Or he can return and try to save Sandra. The difference is that Barney still has time to make his decision. Tool did not. Barney's internal conflict. Barney's struggle is therefore deeper than whether he can complete a dangerous mission. He is asking himself what kind of person he wants to be. As a mercenary, he is trained to calculate risk. As a leader, he must protect his team. As a human being, he feels responsible for Sandra. These three identities conflict. The professional Barney says, "Leave Valina." The leader says, "Do not endanger the team unnecessarily." The human being says, "You cannot leave Sandra behind." That conflict is what pushes the story toward its final act. Violence and morality. The Expendables is full of violence, but the movie repeatedly distinguishes between different kinds of violence. Gunner's violence is uncontrolled. Monroe's violence is exploitative. Christmas's violence becomes protective. Barney's violence is professional but increasingly moralized. Tool's story shows the consequences of failing to act. These differences are essential. The film is not arguing that violence is good. It is creating an action movie world where violence is unavoidable and then asking what separates a hero from a villain. The answer is not physical strength. The heroes and villains are all capable of killing. The difference is why they kill and what boundaries they are willing to respect. Why these events matter to the final battle. Everything introduced in this portion of the movie prepares the audience for the final confrontation. Gunner's instability creates internal conflict. Christmas's relationship with Lacey shows that the mercenaries have emotional lives. Sandra gives Barney a reason to care about Valina. Monroe provides a villain who represents corruption. Church's CIA connection reveals the political manipulation behind the mission. Tool's confession gives Barney the emotional motivation to return. All of these elements eventually converge. The mission begins as a contract. It becomes a moral obligation. That transformation is the heart of the story. The bigger theme, loyalty. Above everything else, The Expendables is a movie about loyalty. These men are mercenaries, but they do not behave like individuals who care only about money. They have developed their own code. Barney's decision to remove Gunner shows that loyalty has conditions. You must protect the team. You must control yourself. You must not become a danger to the people beside you. Christmas's reaction to Lacey's abuse demonstrates another form of loyalty. Tool's story demonstrates what happens when someone fails to act when action is needed. Sandra's refusal to abandon Valina demonstrates loyalty to her homeland and family. Even Garza's anger over what happens to Sandra reflects a distorted form of paternal loyalty. The movie therefore connects its characters through different versions of the same idea. Final perspective. The events described in this part of The Expendables are much more important than simply setting up an action climax. They establish the movie's characters and its moral structure. The opening pirate rescue introduces the Expendables as highly skilled professionals while immediately exposing Gunner's instability. Barney's decision to dismiss him establishes the leader's moral authority. Christmas's problems with Lacey show that these seemingly invincible action heroes are still vulnerable in ordinary life. The meeting with Mr. Church and Trench expands the story from a mercenary operation into an international conspiracy. The mission to Valina introduces Sandra, whose connection to General Garza transforms Barney's understanding of the assignment. James Monroe emerges as the true villain, representing corruption, greed, manipulation, and the abuse of political power. Gunner's alliance with Monroe shows the danger of alienation and uncontrolled violence. Christmas's response to Lacey's abuse demonstrates that the team's violence can also be motivated by loyalty and protection. The revelation that Church is connected to the CIA gives the mission another layer of deception, while the explanation surrounding Monroe makes clear that the Expendables themselves are being used as deniable weapons. But the most important emotional development comes through Barney's conversation with Tool. Tool's confession about allowing a woman to die introduces the theme of regret. Barney realizes that walking away from Sandra could become another moment he regrets for the rest of his life. That realization changes everything. The Expendables are introduced as men who sell their skills. But the story gradually turns them into something more complicated, men searching for a reason to use those skills for something they believe is right. The movie's explosions, gunfights, knives, martial arts, and enormous weapons provide the spectacle, but underneath that spectacle is a surprisingly human story about damaged people trying to protect one another. Barney's greatest strength is not that he can fight. It is that he still cares. Christmas's greatest strength is not his knife. It is his loyalty. Tool's greatest lesson is not about violence. It is about regret. And the central question of The Expendables is ultimately very simple. When you have spent your life treating danger as a job, what happens when you finally encounter something you cannot walk away from? For Barney Ross, the answer is that the job stops being just a job. It becomes personal. And once that happens, the Expendables are no longer simply mercenaries completing a contract. They become a team willing to risk everything for one another and for people who cannot protect themselves. The final act of The Expendables, 2010, is where the film's different storylines finally come together. What began as a paid mercenary assignment becomes a personal rescue mission, and what looked like a straightforward operation against General Garza transforms into a battle against James Monroe and his private army. At the same time, the climax completes several character arcs, especially those of Barney, Yin Yang, Gunnar Jensen, Sandra, and the Expendables as a whole. The action is intentionally enormous, but beneath the gunfire and explosions is a story about loyalty, redemption, sacrifice, and the idea that some people are worth risking everything for. Barney decides to return for Sandra. After talking with Tool and hearing his painful confession about the woman he once failed to save, Barney makes an important decision. He is going back for Sandra. This is one of the biggest turning points in the film because Barney is no longer acting as a mercenary completing a contract. The original mission has effectively collapsed. The situation has become too dangerous. The political circumstances have changed. And Sandra has become personally important to Barney. Yet Barney's decision also contains an element of guilt. Tool's story forces him to confront the possibility that walking away could become something he regrets for the rest of his life. Barney has spent years making difficult choices. He has probably learned to protect himself emotionally by treating missions as business. But Sandra breaks through that defense. He cannot simply tell himself that she is someone else's problem. He knows she is trapped. He knows Monroe is willing to hurt her. And he knows that leaving her behind would violate the moral code he has been trying to maintain. So Barney decides to return. This creates another confrontation between Gunnar and the people who were once his teammates. The situation is particularly interesting because Gunnar has already betrayed the group by working with Monroe. He knows their capabilities. He knows Barney's methods. And he understands how dangerous Yang is. The pursuit eventually leads to an abandoned warehouse. This location is perfect for the film's style. An abandoned industrial building provides narrow spaces, hard surfaces, metal structures, shadows, and plenty of opportunities for physical combat. The story is about to become personal again. Yin-Yang vs. Gunner, the second fight. Yang and Gunner fight for the second time. Their contrasting physical styles make the confrontation effective. Gunner is enormous and relies heavily on strength. Yang is smaller, faster, and more technically precise. This fight therefore represents two different philosophies of combat. Gunner believes in overwhelming physical power. Yang relies on speed, timing, and technique. The battle also has emotional significance because Gunner is not simply an anonymous enemy. He used to be one of them. That makes the fight uncomfortable. The Expendables have fought countless enemies, but fighting someone who once belonged to their family is different. Gunner has crossed a line. Yet the possibility of redemption remains. Barney saves Yang. The confrontation becomes extremely dangerous when Gunner attempts to impale Yang on a pipe. At this moment, Barney intervenes. He shoots Gunner. The action is sudden and decisive. Barney is willing to kill someone who threatens his teammate. But there is an important difference between Barney's response and Gunner's earlier behavior. Barney is not killing Gunner out of cruelty. He is stopping an immediate threat. The scene reinforces the moral distinction between controlled violence and uncontrolled violence. Gunner was about to kill Yang. Barney acts to prevent that death. The decision also demonstrates Barney's priorities. His team comes first. Gunner's redemption begins. Although Barney shoots Gunner, Gunner survives. This gives the character a chance to change. He realizes that Monroe has used him. He also understands that his former teammates have not abandoned him completely. Instead of continuing to fight them, Gunner makes amends. He gives Barney information about General Garza's palace. This is the beginning of Gunner's redemption. The movie does not suddenly pretend that Gunner's previous behavior never happened. He betrayed the team. He worked with Monroe. He endangered Yang. But he now chooses to help the people he previously betrayed. His information gives Barney and Yang a tactical advantage. That information becomes essential to the final assault. Gunner therefore begins moving from enemy back toward teammate. Barney returns to the team. Barney boards the plane with Yang. When he enters, he discovers that the rest of the Expendables are already there. This is one of the most satisfying moments in the movie. Barney had intended to handle the mission alone. His teammates refuse to let him. They have decided that Sandra is not just Barney's problem. She is their problem. This scene captures the emotional meaning of the team. They may be mercenaries, but they have developed a bond stronger than a paycheck. Barney does not need to convince them. They are already committed. The Expendables are going to Valina together. The infiltration of Garza's compound. The team infiltrates General Garza's compound. At this stage, the film shifts into full action mode. The Expendables are no longer conducting reconnaissance. They are preparing for war. Their plan involves planting explosives throughout the compound. This is classic Expendables strategy. They are not interested in quietly eliminating one or two guards. They intend to attack the entire infrastructure supporting Monroe and Garza. The explosives are important because they allow the team to turn the compound itself into a weapon. Their objective is not merely to defeat individual enemies. They want to destroy the organization. Garza prepares for battle. Garza realizes that something is happening. Believing Monroe has hired the mercenaries to kill him, Garza prepares his soldiers for combat. His men paint their faces before the battle. The imagery makes the situation feel almost tribal or ritualistic. The soldiers are preparing psychologically as well as physically. They know a major confrontation is coming. The face paint also reinforces the movie's larger-than-life visual style. This is not intended to resemble a quiet intelligence operation. The final act is designed to feel like a war movie compressed into an action spectacle. The explosives and the rescue. While the team moves through the compound, they plant explosives. Every charge represents another step toward the destruction of Monroe's operation. But Barney's priorities remain divided. He is there to destroy the enemy. He is also there to save Sandra. When he finds her, he attempts to rescue her. This creates the opening Monroe's men need. Barney is captured. The leader of the Expendables is now a prisoner. For a moment, the mission appears to have failed. But the team does not abandon him. That is precisely what the story has been building toward. The Expendables rescue Barney. The team launches a rescue. This is not merely another action sequence. It demonstrates the principle that defines the group. No one gets left behind. Barney would have returned for Sandra. Now the team returns for Barney. The relationship is reciprocal. The Expendables save Barney and eliminate one of Monroe's key men, known as the Brit. The rescue also changes the momentum of the battle. The team is back together. And now they can fight at full strength. The battle with Payne. One of Monroe's most dangerous enforcers is Payne, played by Steve Austin. Payne is physically intimidating and brutal. He becomes one of Barney's primary opponents. During the chaos, Payne wrestles Barney. The fight is extremely physical. Barney is a powerful fighter, but Payne is also an imposing opponent. The battle demonstrates why the villains cannot simply be dismissed as disposable targets. They are dangerous enough to challenge the heroes directly. Meanwhile, the rest of the Expendables are fighting Garza's forces. Caesar fights back. Terry Crews's Hail Caesar gets an opportunity to fight back during the chaos. His physical presence becomes particularly important because the battle has expanded into a massive firefight. Caesar is not simply carrying a large weapon for visual spectacle. He is one of the people keeping the team alive. The fight against Payne and the surrounding soldiers reinforces the idea that the Expendables operate as a unit. One member can be fighting hand-to-hand while another provides covering fire. Another can plant explosives. Their individual specialties combine into one coordinated force. Garza finally challenges Monroe. One of the most significant character developments occurs when General Garza finally stands up to James Monroe. Garza has spent much of the story allowing Monroe to manipulate him. But Sandra's suffering changes the situation. Garza orders Monroe to leave. He even returns Monroe's money. This is a dramatic rejection of the relationship between them. Garza is effectively saying, the partnership is over. He has realized that Monroe's influence has become destructive. More importantly, he is no longer willing to allow Sandra to be used. For a moment, Garza seems ready to reclaim control of his own country. But Monroe refuses to accept this. Monroe kills Garza. Instead of leaving, Monroe kills Garza. This moment demonstrates the true nature of Monroe's power. Garza may have been the visible dictator, but Monroe was the real force behind the operation. The instant Garza stops being useful, Monroe eliminates him. Garza's death is therefore symbolic. The puppet is destroyed by the person who controlled him. Monroe then escapes with Payne and Sandra. Now the conflict is completely clear. Barney and the Expendables are not fighting Garza anymore. Garza is dead. They are fighting Monroe. And Sandra remains in danger. Garza's soldiers turn against the Expendables. After Garza's death, his soldiers open fire on the Expendables. From their perspective, the mercenaries are responsible for the chaos. The situation becomes extremely dangerous. The team is surrounded by hostile forces. But this is exactly the type of environment in which they are most effective. The Expendables fight their way through. Their escape is not a retreat. They are advancing while under fire. This creates the movie's signature combination of action and destruction. Gunfire fills the compound. Explosions begin. Buildings and equipment are destroyed. The entire operation begins collapsing. The compound is destroyed. The explosives planted earlier finally become important. The team detonates them. The compound is destroyed. This is more than a visual climax. The destruction represents the collapse of Monroe's criminal organization. The place that supported his power is gone. The money, the weapons, the infrastructure, the military force. Everything begins disappearing in a massive explosion. The film uses destruction as a visual representation of victory. Monroe's system cannot simply be reformed. It has to be destroyed. Toll versus Payne. One of the most brutal confrontations involves Toll Road and Payne. Toll manages to overpower Payne and kills him by burning him alive. The scene is intentionally harsh. Payne has spent the movie representing physical brutality. His death therefore becomes a violent answer to the violence he has inflicted. It also gives Toll Road a rare moment to stand out. The character has been quieter than some of the others. But the final battle allows him to demonstrate exactly why he is part of this elite team. He may not be the loudest member. He may not have the most dialogue. But when the moment comes, he can be extremely dangerous. Barney and Caesar destroy the helicopter. Monroe attempts to escape by helicopter. This creates another classic action movie obstacle. The villain is trying to get away while the heroes race against time. Barney and Caesar work together to destroy the helicopter before Monroe can escape. The sequence emphasizes teamwork once again. Barney does not accomplish everything alone. Caesar is beside him. The two combine their skills to prevent Monroe's escape. The helicopter's destruction also traps Monroe on the ground. Now there is nowhere left for him to run. Barney and Christmas pursue Monroe. Barney and Christmas catch up with Monroe. This is fitting because the two men have been the emotional center of the team throughout the story. Christmas has experienced his own personal conflict. Barney has struggled with Sandra and the mission. Now both men have a common goal. Save Sandra. Stop Monroe. The final confrontation is therefore more personal than the original assignment. Monroe represents everything the Expendables oppose. He uses people. He exploits countries. He manipulates governments. He treats human lives as disposable. Barney and Christmas refuse to allow him to continue. Sandra is saved. Barney and Christmas rescue Sandra. This completes Barney's emotional journey. At the beginning, he is prepared to abandon the mission. He believes walking away is the responsible choice. But Tool's confession forces him to reconsider. He returns. He risks his life. His team follows. And eventually Sandra survives. The rescue gives Barney something he has been missing. A sense that his skills can be used for something meaningful. He is still a mercenary. But he has chosen to use his abilities to save someone rather than simply fulfill a contract. Monroe's death. Barney and Christmas kill Monroe. The villain who manipulated Gaza, exploited Valina, and betrayed the CIA is finally eliminated. His death brings the story's central conflict to an end. Monroe's power was built on corruption. Once the Expendables attack his organization directly, that power collapses. His death is therefore not simply revenge. It represents the destruction of the system he created. The mission that began as a covert operation has ended with Monroe dead, Gaza dead, the compound destroyed, and Sandra alive. Barney's decision about the money. After the mission, Barney receives his reward. But he does something significant with it. He gives the money to Sandra so that it can be used to restore Valina. This decision completes his character arc. At the beginning, the Expendables are mercenaries. They work for money. Barney could have kept his reward. Instead, he gives it away. Why? Because the mission has changed him. The money no longer represents the same thing. He realizes that the people of Valina need help rebuilding after the destruction. Barney therefore turns his payment into something constructive. The action hero who spends the movie destroying a criminal empire ultimately uses his reward to help rebuild what was damaged. Gunner's redemption. The team eventually returns home. Gunner is with them. He is recovering from his injuries. More importantly, he has been accepted back into the group. This is the completion of Gunner's redemption. Earlier, Gunner represented the dangerous side of the mercenary lifestyle. He could not control his anger. He attempted to kill a helpless prisoner. He betrayed the team. He worked for Monroe. He nearly killed Young. But he eventually helped Barney by revealing the layout of Gaza's palace. That choice allowed him to begin earning his way back. The movie therefore suggests that redemption is possible. Gunner is not defined only by his worst decision. He is defined by what he does afterward. The return to Tool's tattoo parlor. The film ends on a much lighter note. The Expendables return to Tool's tattoo parlor. This location has symbolic importance. Throughout the story, Tool has represented experience, regret, and reflection. Now the tattoo shop becomes a place where the team can relax. They are no longer fighting. They are not running from anyone. They are simply together. That is significant. The movie begins with professional violence. It ends with friendship. The team has survived. And Gunner is back. Christmas and Tool's knife-throwing game. The final sequence involves Christmas and Tool playing a knife-throwing game. Christmas composes a mocking poem about Tool while throwing knives. He eventually hits a bullseye from outside the building. The scene is playful and deliberately ridiculous. After all the violence and destruction, the film chooses to end with humor. That is completely consistent with its tone. The Expendables has never been a completely serious movie. Its exaggerated action is balanced by jokes, insults, and camaraderie. The final knife-throwing sequence reminds the audience that these characters enjoy being together. Their relationship is not built exclusively around combat. They tease one another. They compete. They laugh. They behave like friends. Why the ending works? The ending works because it resolves several character journeys simultaneously. Barney begins the story as a professional mercenary who tries to separate emotion from work. By the end, he has accepted that some missions become personal. Christmas begins with heartbreak. By the end, he is back with his friends. Gunner begins as an unstable and dangerous teammate. By the end, he is recovering and has been welcomed back. Sandra begins as a contact. She becomes the reason Barney risks everything. Monroe begins as a hidden manipulator. He ends as the primary target of the Expendables. Tool begins as a man haunted by his past. His story helps Barney avoid making a similar mistake. Every major character contributes to the final emotional structure. The real meaning of Barney's choice. Perhaps the most important decision in the ending is Barney's choice to return. If Barney had stayed away, he would have remained a professional mercenary. He would have completed his mission as far as possible and moved on. But he chooses differently. He accepts responsibility. That decision also changes how he views his team. He does not want them to risk their lives for him, but they choose to do so. Their response demonstrates that the Expendables are no longer simply employees working together. They are a family. Their loyalty is voluntary. And that is why their willingness to fight becomes emotionally satisfying. The Expendables as a brotherhood. The movie's final message is ultimately about brotherhood. These men are dangerous. They are violent. They are flawed. They make mistakes. But they protect each other. When Barney goes back for Sandra, Young follows. When Barney is captured, the others rescue him. When Gunnar needs redemption, they give him an opportunity. When the mission becomes impossible, they refuse to abandon one another. That is what separates them from Monroe's organization. Monroe has employees. Barney has friends. Monroe uses people. Barney protects people. Monroe sees individuals as expendable. Barney refuses to see his teammates that way. Final assessment. The final portion of The Expendables transforms what could have been a conventional action story into a celebration of loyalty and redemption. Barney's decision to return for Sandra is the emotional turning point. He initially plans to go alone, but Yin Yang accompanies him because the bond between the team members is stronger than Barney's desire to protect them from danger. Gunnar's second confrontation with Yang demonstrates how far he has fallen, but Barney's intervention and Gunnar's decision to provide crucial information allow him to begin his redemption. When Barney returns to the plane and finds the entire team waiting, the film makes its central point unmistakable: he is not alone. The infiltration of Garza's compound then becomes an enormous action spectacle, but the spectacle is supported by character motivations. The explosives represent the destruction of Monroe's criminal empire. Barney's capture demonstrates the danger of the mission. The team's rescue of him proves their loyalty. Garza's final confrontation with Monroe adds another layer of tragedy. Garza tries to reclaim his authority and protect Sandra, but Monroe kills him because he has become inconvenient. The dictator who once appeared to be the main villain is revealed to be another victim of Monroe's manipulation. The Expendables is one of those action movies where the cast is almost as important as the story. Released in 2010, the film was built around the idea of bringing together performers associated with different generations and styles of action cinema. Sylvester Stallone, Jason Statham, Jet Li, Dolph Lundgren, Randy Couture, Terry Crews, Mickey Rourke, Bruce Willis, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Eric Roberts, and Steve Austin all contribute to a movie that deliberately celebrates the larger-than-life action films of previous decades. What makes the casting particularly interesting is that the actors are not simply placed together randomly. Their real-world screen identities influence how audiences perceive their characters. Stallone brings the legacy of Rocky and Rambo. Statham represents a newer generation of physically intense action stars. Jet Li brings international martial arts credibility. Lundgren recalls the muscular action cinema of the 1980s. Bruce Willis brings the legacy of Die Hard, while Schwarzenegger's cameo functions almost like a meeting between two generations of Hollywood action mythology. The result is an ensemble in which every major character contributes something different to the film's personality. Sylvester Stallone as Barney Ross. Barney Ross is the central character and leader of the Expendables, played by Sylvester Stallone. Ross is an experienced mercenary who has spent much of his life operating in dangerous environments. He is calm, practical, physically powerful, and capable of making difficult decisions. But beneath his professional exterior is a man carrying considerable emotional weight. Stallone is particularly well suited to this role because his own career has been associated with characters who combine physical toughness with emotional vulnerability. Barney is not simply a soldier who enjoys violence. He understands its consequences. This becomes particularly clear when Gunnar Jensen crosses a line during the opening mission. Gunnar wants to brutally punish a captured pirate, and Barney eventually removes him from the team. The decision establishes Barney's leadership philosophy. The Expendables may be killers, but they have rules. Barney understands that uncontrolled violence can destroy a team from within. His relationship with the other Expendables is therefore based on trust and discipline. He is willing to risk himself, but he also feels responsible for the lives of his teammates. The mission to Valina changes Barney further. At first, he sees the assignment as a job. But Sandra's situation affects him emotionally. After learning about the corruption surrounding General Garza and James Monroe, Barney begins to understand that the mission is about more than money. His decision to return for Sandra becomes the defining moment of his character. Barney chooses responsibility over convenience. Stallone's performance is deliberately restrained. Rather than constantly delivering speeches, he communicates Barney's emotional state through his physical presence, expressions, and quiet conversations. By the end, Barney has evolved from a mercenary leader into something closer to a protector. Jason Statham as Lee Christmas. Lee Christmas is played by Jason Statham and serves as Barney's closest ally. Christmas is the team's blade specialist, making knives an extension of his personality and fighting style. Compared with Barney, Christmas is more energetic and emotionally expressive. He is confident, sarcastic, aggressive, and sometimes impulsive. Statham's personality fits the character perfectly because his action star image was already associated with fast, physical combat. Christmas's fighting style is based more on speed and precision than overwhelming force. His knife sequences therefore distinguish him from Barney's heavier combat approach. But Christmas's personal storyline is just as important as his combat abilities. His girlfriend Lacey leaves him for another man, which reveals that the seemingly fearless mercenary has problems dealing with ordinary emotional life. Christmas can confront armed criminals without hesitation, but romantic rejection affects him deeply. This contrast makes him more human. His reaction becomes even more serious when he discovers that Lacey's new partner has physically abused her. Christmas responds violently, but his motivation is no longer jealousy. It is protection. This is consistent with the larger theme of the movie. Christmas may be a professional killer, but he has a personal code about protecting people he cares about. His relationship with Barney also provides much of the movie's humor. The two men have a brother-like friendship. They can argue and insult one another without threatening their loyalty. That chemistry is one of the film's most enjoyable elements. Jet Li as Yin Yang. Yin Yang, played by Jet Li, provides the movie's martial arts dimension. His character is physically smaller than many of the other Expendables, but that is precisely what makes his fighting style interesting. The film uses Yin Yang to demonstrate that physical size does not determine combat ability. His speed, technique, and precision allow him to fight much larger opponents. Jet Li's presence also expands the movie beyond the traditional American action formula. The Expendables combines several action traditions. Stallone represents muscular American action cinema. Statham represents modern British action. Dolph Lundgren represents 1980s physical action heroes. Jet Li represents martial arts cinema. Yin Yang is therefore more than another team member. He is part of the movie's broader celebration of action genres. His conflict with Gunnar is particularly important. Gunnar relies heavily on physical strength and aggression, while Yin Yang uses skill and speed. Their clashes demonstrate two completely different approaches to violence. Yet Yang is also one of the more disciplined members of the team. When Gunnar begins behaving cruelly during the pirate mission, Yang intervenes. Later, when Barney decides to return to Valina, Yang accompanies him. Yet Yang is also one of the more disciplined members of the team. When Gunnar begins behaving cruelly during the pirate mission, Yang intervenes. Later, when Barney decides to return to Valina, Yang accompanies him. That action demonstrates his loyalty. Yang does not need a long emotional speech. His willingness to follow Barney into danger communicates everything. Dolph Lundgren as Gunnar Jensen. Dolph Lundgren's Gunnar Jensen is one of the most complicated members of the team. At first glance, Gunnar appears to be a classic Dolph Lundgren character. He is enormous, intimidating, physically powerful, and extremely dangerous. But the movie adds another dimension. Gunnar is unstable. He struggles with anger and self-control. During the opening mission, he becomes unnecessarily cruel toward a captured pirate. That behavior leads Barney to dismiss him. The decision creates a major internal conflict because Gunnar feels rejected. Instead of reflecting on his behavior, he turns to James Monroe. This demonstrates how dangerous alienation can become. Gunnar already possesses enormous physical power. What he lacks is emotional control. His alliance with Monroe therefore becomes a symbol of what happens when strength is separated from loyalty and morality. However, Gunnar eventually gets a chance at redemption. When Barney confronts him, Gunnar realizes that Monroe's organization has used him. He gives Barney important information about Garza's palace. That information helps the Expendables complete their final mission. By the end, Gunnar has returned to the team. His recovery is significant because the movie refuses to define him entirely by his worst actions. He makes mistakes. He causes harm. But he is capable of changing. Lundgren therefore gets to play both sides of the traditional action hero image, the intimidating physical warrior and the damaged man struggling to control himself. Randy Couture as Toll Road. Randy Couture plays Toll Road. Couture's background as a professional mixed martial artist gives the role a different kind of authenticity. Toll Road is one of the quieter members of the team. He does not dominate conversations in the same way as Barney, Christmas, or Gunnar. Instead, he functions as a dependable professional. That is an important role within an ensemble. Not every character needs to be the leader. Some characters make the team believable simply by being reliable. Toll Road contributes to the group through his demolitions expertise and combat ability. During the final battle, however, he receives one of the movie's most brutal moments. His confrontation with Payne demonstrates that the quieter member of the group is still extremely dangerous. The film therefore uses Toll Road as an example of controlled professionalism. He does not need to constantly announce how capable he is. The action demonstrates it. David Zayas as General Garza. General Garza is played by David Zayas. At first, Garza appears to be the traditional dictator. He controls Valina and commands a military force. But the movie gradually complicates his position. Gaza is actually being manipulated by James Monroe. Monroe keeps Gaza in power because Gaza provides the appearance of political authority while Monroe controls the profitable criminal operations behind the scenes. This makes Gaza a figurehead. However, Gaza is not entirely innocent. He remains an authoritarian leader responsible for the conditions in Valina. His character therefore occupies an uncomfortable middle ground. He is both oppressor and victim. His relationship with Sandra adds another layer. Gaza may be ruthless as a political leader, but he cares about his daughter. When Monroe has Sandra tortured, Gaza becomes increasingly angry. Eventually, he stands against Monroe. He returns Monroe's money and orders him to leave. Unfortunately, Monroe responds by killing him. Gaza's death demonstrates the danger of allowing someone else to control your power. He spent too long depending on Monroe. When he finally tries to break free, it is too late. Giselle Iti as Sandra. Sandra is played by Giselle Iti. She is one of the most important characters because she provides the emotional motivation for Barney's return to Valina. Sandra is General Gaza's daughter, but she does not simply function as an extension of her father. She is connected emotionally to Valina and refuses to abandon the island. When Barney initially decides to abort the mission, Sandra refuses to leave with him. That decision demonstrates courage. She understands the danger but chooses to remain. Her suffering at Monroe's hands also reveals the true brutality of the villain. Sandra becomes the human face of the political conflict. Without her, Valina could feel like nothing more than a fictional battlefield. Through Sandra, the audience understands that real people are trapped inside the political struggle. Barney's decision to return is therefore not about completing a contract. It is about saving a person. That is what changes the meaning of the entire mission. Charisma Carpenter as Lacey. Charisma Carpenter plays Lacey, Lee Christmas's girlfriend. Lacey's storyline is relatively small compared with the central Valina conflict, but it gives Christmas a personal dimension. She leaves Christmas for another man. Initially, Christmas reacts with hurt and anger. But when he discovers that she has been physically abused, his feelings change. He confronts the abusive man and his friends. Where Barney is controlled and Christmas is sarcastic, Caesar often provides enthusiastic physical comedy. Yet the movie never turns him into a joke. When the fighting begins, Caesar is extremely effective. He demonstrates that the team's humor does not weaken their professionalism. During the final battle, he plays an important role in helping Barney. Their teamwork during the helicopter sequence demonstrates that Caesar is an essential part of the unit. Mickey Rourke as Tool. Mickey Rourke's Tool is arguably the most emotionally important supporting character. Tool is a former member of the Expendables who now works as a tattoo artist. His role is unusual because he does not spend the movie participating in the major action sequences. Instead, he represents reflection. Tool has stepped away from the mercenary lifestyle. He has seen what violence does to people. When Barney visits him and talks about Sandra, Tool tells him about a woman he once failed to save. She wanted to die. Tool could have intervened, but he did not. He has carried the memory ever since. This confession becomes the emotional key to Barney's decision. Tool essentially warns Barney not to make a choice that he will regret for the rest of his life. Rourke's performance is restrained and melancholic. He does not need action scenes to dominate the movie. His role gives the film something its explosions cannot provide: emotional consequence. Bruce Willis as Mr. Church. Bruce Willis plays Mr. Church, the mysterious man who offers Barney the Valina mission. Willis's presence is significant both within and outside the story. Within the story, Church represents the intelligence world. He knows about Monroe and the political situation. Eventually, Barney discovers that Church is connected to the CIA. This explains why the mission must be handled indirectly. The CIA cannot openly assassinate a former operative. Therefore, they hire mercenaries. Church's character embodies the moral ambiguity of covert operations. The agency wants Monroe eliminated, but it does not want responsibility for the killing. The Expendables become useful precisely because they are deniable. Outside the story, Willis's presence carries enormous significance. His action film reputation makes his meeting with Stallone feel like an event. The two stars represent different branches of Hollywood action cinema. Their interaction became one of the film's most memorable scenes. Arnold Schwarzenegger as Trench Mauser. Arnold Schwarzenegger appears as Trench Mauser in an uncredited cameo. His screen time is short, but his impact is enormous. The reason is simple. Stallone, Willis, and Schwarzenegger together represent an extraordinary concentration of action movie history. Their scene is almost a celebration of the genre itself. Schwarzenegger's character is Barney's rival and another experienced professional. Trench initially receives the opportunity to take the Velina contract but passes it to Barney. The character's relaxed attitude suggests confidence. He does not need to fight for every job. The cameo also works as a playful reference to the star's real-world careers and rivalries. For fans of 1980s and 1990s action cinema, the scene is one of the film's biggest attractions. Eric Roberts as James Monroe. Eric Roberts plays the primary villain, James Monroe. Monroe is a former CIA officer who has gone rogue. Unlike some action villains who rely almost entirely on physical strength, Monroe's greatest weapon is manipulation. He understands political power. He understands intelligence operations. He knows how to use other people. General Garza becomes his puppet. Gunner becomes his temporary employee. Sandra becomes a source of information. Monroe's philosophy is essentially based on profit and control. He does not care about loyalty. He cares about money. That makes him the perfect opposite of Barney. Barney is a mercenary who develops loyalty. Monroe is an intelligence professional who abandons loyalty. Barney sees people as teammates. Monroe sees people as tools. This contrast explains why their final confrontation feels satisfying. Monroe represents everything Barney's code rejects. His death therefore brings the moral conflict to its conclusion. Steve Austin as Payne. Steve Austin plays Payne, one of Monroe's most dangerous enforcers. Austin's wrestling background gives him enormous physical presence. Payne is not a subtle villain. He is brutal, intimidating, and physically powerful. His job is to be the muscle behind Monroe's organization. This creates a physical contrast with Barney and the Expendables. Payne represents brute force without loyalty. He is not a member of a family. He is an instrument used by Monroe. His confrontation with Barney and later with Toll Road provides some of the film's most physical combat. Ultimately, Toll kills Payne by burning him alive. The death is deliberately extreme, matching the movie's exaggerated approach to action. How the cast works as an ensemble. The most impressive thing about The Expendables is not any single performance. It is the combination. Stallone gives the movie leadership. Statham supplies speed and charisma. Jet Li adds martial arts, Lundgren provides physical intimidation and internal conflict. Couture adds combat authenticity. Cruise supplies humor and heavy weapons. Rourke provides emotional depth. Willis and Schwarzenegger provide star power and nostalgia. Roberts supplies the villainous intelligence. Austin supplies brute physical opposition. Even the supporting characters have specific functions. Sandra provides the emotional reason for the mission. Lacey humanizes Christmas. Garza complicates the political conflict. Tool provides wisdom and regret. Gunner demonstrates the possibility of redemption. The Brit and Payne provide physical threats. Each piece contributes to the larger action movie machine. The generational meaning of the cast. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of the cast is its generational mixture. Stallone and Schwarzenegger represent the golden era of muscular action cinema. Willis represents a slightly different kind of action hero, one who often mixed toughness with humor and vulnerability. Lundgren carries the physical tradition of the 1980s. Jet Li represents international martial arts. Statham represents the next generation of action stars. Couture and Austin bring legitimate combat sports backgrounds. The development of The Expendables is an interesting example of how a movie can evolve dramatically between its earliest screenplay and its final form. Although audiences ultimately knew the project as a Sylvester Stallone action vehicle packed with famous stars, the idea did not begin with that enormous ensemble. It began with a screenplay called Barrow, written by David Callahan. Understanding this early development is important because it explains where the basic concept came from and how Sylvester Stallone transformed it into the movie audiences eventually saw. David Callahan's original concept. The story of The Expendables begins in the middle of the 2000s, when screenwriter David Callahan was working under a blind commitment deal with Warner Brothers. In 2005, Callahan submitted the first draft of a mercenary-inspired action screenplay called Barrow. The title may not mean much to modern audiences because the final movie eventually became The Expendables, but Barrow represents the earliest recognizable foundation of the project. The important point is that the original concept was already centered on mercenaries. That basic idea survived the development process. The final movie would revolve around Barney Ross and his team of professional mercenaries, but the concept itself existed before Stallone became attached. Callahan's initial screenplay therefore provided the foundation upon which the later movie was constructed. This is common in Hollywood development. A screenplay may begin as one project, pass through different writers and filmmakers, change its characters and tone, and eventually emerge as something considerably different from the original draft. That is essentially what happened here. The meaning of a blind commitment deal. To understand the circumstances surrounding Callahan's screenplay, it helps to understand what a blind commitment deal means. A studio may enter an arrangement with a writer in which the writer is obligated to develop material for the studio, even before a particular movie has been fully defined. This kind of arrangement can give a screenwriter an opportunity to develop several concepts. Callahan used this opportunity to create Barrow. The screenplay was designed around the mercenary action genre. That genre was particularly appropriate for the period because action films had long been fascinated with soldiers for hire, covert operatives, military specialists, and characters who existed outside conventional institutions. A mercenary story also provides enormous flexibility. The characters can travel to different countries. They can undertake rescue missions. They can fight dictators, criminal organizations, terrorists, or corrupt officials. And most importantly, they can operate outside normal military structures. That freedom would eventually become one of the defining characteristics of the Expendables. Callahan revised the screenplay. Callahan did not simply submit one draft and walk away. He revised the screenplay twice more. His third and final revision was submitted in early 2006. This is significant because screenplays rarely arrive at studios in a form that remains completely unchanged. Revisions are necessary to improve story structure, character motivation, pacing, dialogue, and action. Callahan's repeated revisions gave the project a more developed foundation. By early 2006, there was a substantial screenplay that could attract the attention of another filmmaker. That filmmaker was Sylvester Stallone. Sylvester Stallone enters the picture. Stallone's involvement became the major turning point in the project's history. By this point in his career, Stallone had already established himself as one of the most recognizable action stars in Hollywood history. His career had been built around characters such as Rocky Balboa and John Rambo. But Stallone had also demonstrated an interest in returning to established action traditions. The concept of an ensemble movie was particularly attractive to him. Instead of building the entire film around one hero, an ensemble would allow several major characters to share the spotlight. That idea was crucial. The Expendables would eventually become famous precisely because it brought together a remarkable group of action performers. But the origin of that ensemble strategy can be connected to Stallone's interest in creating an ensemble action movie after reading Callahan's screenplay. Barrow becomes a starting point. Stallone reviewed Callahan's third and final revision of Barrow. Rather than simply filming the screenplay exactly as it had been written, Stallone used it as a starting point for developing the Expendables. That distinction is extremely important. The original screenplay provided the foundation. Stallone then reshaped the material. This is how the final movie acquired its distinctive personality. The basic mercenary concept remained. But the project increasingly became Stallone's interpretation of the action genre. The result was a movie that felt simultaneously contemporary and nostalgic. Why the mercenary concept was perfect for Stallone. The mercenary premise gave Stallone an ideal framework for the type of action film he wanted to create. A group of mercenaries naturally allows multiple specialists to work together. One character can be the leader. Another can specialize in knives. Another can specialize in martial arts. Another can specialize in explosives. Another can specialize in weapons. This structure makes it possible to build an ensemble without making every character identical. It also creates opportunities for different actors to showcase their strengths. That became especially important as Stallone began assembling the cast. The movie could be built around personalities as much as characters. From one hero to an ensemble. Traditional action movies often revolve around one central protagonist. The hero has the majority of the screen time. Other characters exist primarily to support the protagonist. Stallone wanted something different. The Expendables would have a leader, but Barney Ross would not be the only attraction. The team itself would become the star. This was a particularly ambitious idea because assembling multiple recognizable action actors can create a problem. Every star has an established screen identity. Every actor needs something memorable to do. If one character dominates too much, the ensemble concept becomes unbalanced. If everyone gets exactly equal attention, the movie can become structurally awkward. Stallone's solution was to give each character a recognizable specialty and personality. That structure can ultimately be traced back to the mercenary concept developed in the screenplay that began as Barrow. The importance of the 2005 to 2006 period. The timing of the project's development is also significant. In the mid-2000s, Hollywood action cinema was changing. The era of the traditional 1980s action hero had largely passed. Superhero films were becoming increasingly important. Digital effects were becoming more sophisticated. Action movies were experimenting with different styles. Stallone was therefore working in an environment where the old-fashioned action hero was no longer the unquestioned center of Hollywood. The Expendables could consequently function as a response to that change. It was an opportunity to celebrate the style of action cinema that had made Stallone and his peers famous. Stallone's personal connection to the genre. Stallone's involvement also gave the project a personal dimension. He was not simply an actor being hired to play a mercenary. He was one of the filmmakers shaping the project. That meant the movie could reflect his understanding of action cinema. Stallone knew how action stars were constructed. He understood the importance of physical presence. He understood the role of humor. He understood the appeal of practical-looking stunts and explosions. And he understood the nostalgia associated with the action films of previous decades. The Expendables therefore became partly a reflection on Stallone's own career. Barney Ross is not exactly Rocky or Rambo. But audiences can recognize elements of Stallone's established screen identity in him. The evolution of the concept. One of the most interesting things about the development process is how a relatively straightforward mercenary concept evolved into something much larger. Callahan's screenplay supplied the basic foundation. Stallone saw an opportunity to turn that foundation into an ensemble. From there, the project could expand around the personalities of action stars. The movie eventually included Jason Statham, Jet Li, Dolph Lundgren, Randy Couture, Terry Crews, Mickey Rourke, and others. The presence of Bruce Willis and Arnold Schwarzenegger made the concept even more ambitious. At that point, the movie was no longer simply a mercenary action film. It had become a celebration of action cinema itself. The role of Barney Ross in the development. Barney Ross is particularly important because he functions as the central organizing character. An ensemble needs a figure who can connect the different personalities. Ross provides that connection. He is the leader. He assigns responsibilities. He makes decisions. He resolves conflicts. He interacts with the other characters individually. This structure allows the film to introduce a large cast without losing its narrative center. Stallone's decision to play Barney also helped give the movie a recognizable anchor. Even when the screen is filled with action stars, the audience always knows whose story is driving the movie. Why the final movie feels nostalgic. The development process ultimately resulted in a movie that deliberately looked backward. The nostalgia was not simply about old actors appearing together. It was built into the concept. Mercenaries. Large weapons. Physical fights. Explosions. Tough dialogue. One-liners. Larger-than-life villains. International locations. A team of highly specialized fighters. These elements were strongly associated with action movies from the era in which Stallone became a major star. By taking Callahan's mercenary concept and reshaping it into an ensemble, Stallone created a vehicle capable of reproducing that style. The screenplay as a foundation rather than a final blueprint. Perhaps the most important lesson from the development story is that Callahan's screenplay should be viewed as a foundation rather than the finished identity of the movie. The third revision of Barrow gave Stallone a developed concept to work with. But Stallone's contribution was transformative. He recognized that the premise could support something larger. The idea of an ensemble allowed him to bring together performers who represented different aspects of action cinema. That approach ultimately became one of the defining characteristics of the finished movie. From screenplay to franchise. Another important consequence of this development process is that the concept eventually proved strong enough to support an entire franchise. The first Expendables film was followed by additional installments. That would not have been possible without the basic concept being flexible enough to accommodate new characters, new missions, and new action scenarios. The mercenary structure makes this relatively easy. The team can go anywhere. They can accept almost any mission. Characters can leave. New characters can join. Different stars can appear. The franchise concept is therefore embedded in the original mercenary premise. Why this development history matters. The development history of the Expendables matters because it demonstrates how collaborative filmmaking can transform an idea. David Callahan created the initial mercenary-inspired screenplay. He revised it multiple times. His third and final revision became the version that attracted Stallone's attention. Stallone then used that screenplay as a starting point for a much larger creative vision. That vision emphasized the ensemble nature of the story. Instead of merely making another mercenary movie, Stallone saw the possibility of bringing together a collection of performers who represented the history of action cinema. That decision ultimately became the defining feature of the film. The journey from Barrow to the Expendables. The evolution from Barrow to the Expendables can therefore be understood in several stages. First came Callahan's original idea. He developed a mercenary-inspired action screenplay. Then came revision. He rewrote the screenplay twice more, eventually producing his third and final revision in early 2006. Then came Stallone. Stallone read that screenplay and recognized that its mercenary framework could become the foundation for an ensemble action film. From there, the concept expanded. The story became associated with Stallone's filmmaking vision. The cast grew. The project became a celebration of action star history. And eventually, the title The Expendables replaced the earlier identity of Barrow. The transformation illustrates an important principle in Hollywood filmmaking. The final movie can be the product of several creative stages rather than the vision of one person from the beginning. Final perspective. The production story of The Expendables begins long before cameras started rolling. In 2005, David Callahan submitted Barrow to Warner Brothers as part of his writing arrangement with the studio. He continued refining the project, producing 2 additional revisions before completing the third version in early 2006. That screenplay became the crucial foundation for what would eventually become The Expendables. When Sylvester Stallone read Callahan's revised screenplay, he recognized the potential for an ensemble action film. That was the turning point. Stallone's contribution was not simply to act in the movie. He saw the possibility of turning a mercenary story into a gathering of action film icons. The final movie would eventually combine Stallone's own legacy with performers representing martial arts, professional wrestling, mixed martial arts, modern action cinema, and the classic Hollywood action tradition. In that sense, the development of The Expendables mirrors the movie's central philosophy. A single specialist can be effective, but a team can be much more powerful. Callahan supplied the foundation. Stallone expanded the vision. The ensemble cast gave it personality. And the resulting movie transformed a relatively conventional mercenary premise into an action film event built around the idea of bringing together an entire generation of action stars. The casting of The Expendables is one of the most interesting parts of the film's production because the movie was conceived not simply as another action film, but as a gathering of performers associated with different generations of action cinema. Sylvester Stallone wanted an ensemble that could feel like a living history of the genre. The final cast included Stallone himself alongside Jason Statham, Jet Li, Dolph Lundgren, Randy Couture, Terry Crews, Mickey Rourke, Bruce Willis, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Eric Roberts, and Steve Austin. But the final lineup was not the one Stallone originally imagined. Several famous actors were considered, offered roles, or approached for appearances. Some declined because of creative concerns, some because of scheduling or legal circumstances, and others because negotiations or personal relationships prevented them from joining. In several cases, actors who did not appear in the first film eventually became part of later installments. That makes the casting story almost as entertaining as the movie itself. Jean-Claude Van Damme, the role he initially rejected. One of the most famous casting stories concerns Jean-Claude Van Damme. Stallone personally offered Van Damme a role in The Expendables. On paper, Van Damme seemed like an almost perfect choice. He was one of the defining action stars of the late 1980s and 1990s. His movies had established him as a martial arts specialist capable of combining athletic movement with traditional action hero charisma. A movie celebrating action cinema would naturally seem like an ideal opportunity for him. Yet Van Damme turned down Stallone's offer. The reason was creative. According to Stallone's account, Van Damme felt that the character did not have enough substance or development. This is a fascinating decision because it demonstrates the difference between an actor's perception of a role and the audience's perception of a movie. From the outside, appearing alongside Stallone, Statham, Jet Li, and other action stars might seem like an obvious career opportunity. But Van Damme apparently wanted more than simply being another tough character in a large ensemble. He wanted a role with greater dramatic substance. Stallone later recalled Van Damme telling him that he should instead be trying to save people in South Central. Whether taken seriously or humorously, the comment illustrates that Van Damme did not initially see the offered part as sufficiently meaningful. The irony of Van Damme's decision. The irony became apparent later. At the premiere of The Expendables, Stallone said that he had spoken with Van Damme by telephone and essentially told him that he had been right about the opportunity. Van Damme reportedly expressed regret about not taking part. This is an entertaining piece of Hollywood history because the actor who turned down the first movie would eventually become one of the major villains in the sequel. Van Damme appeared as Gene Violin in The Expendables 2. That development almost turned the original rejection into a piece of franchise mythology. His decision also demonstrates that casting is not always about whether an actor fits the genre. Van Damme clearly fit the genre. The question was whether the specific character justified his participation. Eventually, the franchise found a role more appropriate for him, a major antagonist with greater presence and a more distinctive personality. Hail Caesar, a role that changed hands several times. The casting history of Hail Caesar is another example of how unpredictable filmmaking can be. The role was originally conceived for Wesley Snipes. This makes sense because Stallone and Snipes had previously worked together on Demolition Man. Snipes was already an established action star and martial artist, making him a natural fit for a movie built around action veterans. The chemistry between Stallone and Snipes could also have given the movie another connection to 1990s action cinema. However, Snipes was unable to take the role because of legal and travel restrictions connected to his tax case. This meant the filmmakers had to look elsewhere. The part was subsequently rewritten for Forrest Whitaker. But scheduling became a problem. Whitaker eventually had to leave the project before filming. The 50 Cent possibility. The role then moved to another unexpected candidate, rapper and actor 50 Cent. This would have changed the dynamic of the team considerably. 50 Cent represented a younger generation and came from a different entertainment background than the traditional action stars surrounding him. His casting would have introduced a stronger connection between the old-school action heroes and contemporary popular culture. But the role ultimately did not remain with him. Eventually, Hail Caesar went to Terry Crews. And in retrospect, this became an extremely effective choice. Terry Crews becomes Hail Caesar. Terry Crews brought something special to the role. A former NFL player with an enormous physical presence, Crews was capable of looking completely convincing alongside Stallone, Statham, Lundgren, and Jet Li. But physicality was not the only advantage. Crews also had a strong comedic personality. That mattered because The Expendables was not designed to be a relentlessly serious war movie. The characters joke with each other. They tease one another. They exaggerate their own reputations. Caesar became one of the characters who helped balance the movie's violence with humor. His enormous weapon also became part of his screen identity. Crews could make the character intimidating while simultaneously making him entertaining. The casting journey therefore ended with an actor who arguably fit the final tone better than some of the earlier possibilities. Interestingly, Wesley Snipes and 50 Cent would eventually appear in later Expendables movies. So the casting process that initially prevented them from appearing in the first installment did not permanently exclude them from the franchise. Steven Seagal, a missed cameo. Another major action star considered for the film was Steven Seagal. Stallone wanted Seagal to make a cameo appearance. Again, the logic was obvious. Seagal had been one of the biggest action stars of the late 1980s and early 1990s. His presence would have added another recognizable name to an already extraordinary cast. But Seagal declined. The reported reason involved negative experiences with producer Avi Lerner. This is another example of how casting depends on more than creative decisions. Even when an actor fits a project perfectly, professional relationships can determine whether that appearance actually happens. Seagal's absence is particularly noticeable when looking at the movie retrospectively because the film was clearly attempting to gather as many action icons as possible. His appearance could have pushed that concept even further. James Monroe, a villain who could have been played by almost anyone. The role of James Monroe also went through an interesting casting process. Several major dramatic actors were considered. Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, Ben Kingsley, Ray Liotta. These are very different performers, but they share something important. All have strong screen personalities. Casting any of them as Monroe would have dramatically changed the villain. Robert De Niro. De Niro could have brought a colder, more psychologically intimidating quality. His history of playing criminals and morally complicated characters would have made Monroe feel dangerous without requiring excessive physical violence. Al Pacino. Pacino might have transformed Monroe into a highly theatrical villain. His intensity and distinctive delivery could have made the character more flamboyant. Ben Kingsley. Kingsley could have brought a more calculating and sophisticated presence. His villain might have felt less like a conventional action antagonist and more like an intelligent political manipulator. Ray Liotta. Liotta would have been particularly appropriate for a corrupt former government operative. He had extensive experience playing morally compromised and criminal characters. But eventually, Stallone chose Eric Roberts. Eric Roberts as James Monroe. Eric Roberts had previously worked with Stallone on The Specialist. That existing relationship likely helped. Roberts also possessed a distinctive quality that made him appropriate for Monroe. He could appear charming and controlled while still feeling threatening. Monroe does not need to beat people up personally. His power comes from manipulation. He controls General Garza. He employs Gunner. He uses pain. He operates through other people. Roberts's performance fits this approach. Monroe is a villain who believes he is smarter than everyone around him. He has turned his former intelligence connections into a personal business empire. His greatest weakness is his arrogance. He believes money and manipulation can solve every problem. Eventually, Barney and the Expendables demonstrate that there are things money cannot control. Sandra Bullock, a rumored possibility. Another fascinating piece of casting history involves Sandra Bullock. Rumors circulated that Stallone's Demolition Man co-star might appear in the Expendables. Bullock later indicated that she did not even know about the project at the time the rumors were circulating. However, she did express interest in returning to action cinema. This is interesting because Bullock had already demonstrated that she could combine action with humor and character development. Her presence would also have changed the gender balance of the ensemble. The final first film remained overwhelmingly male, so a major action role for Bullock could have significantly altered the movie's dynamic. But ultimately, she did not appear. The rumor demonstrates how enormous the casting ambitions surrounding the movie had become. Once audiences learned that Stallone was attempting to assemble action legends, almost every major action performer seemed like a potential candidate. Mr. Church, the most difficult role to cast. One of the most interesting casting problems involved Mr. Church. Church is the mysterious man who hires the Expendables for their mission. The role required a recognizable action star because Church had to feel important even before the audience understood his true identity. The filmmakers initially approached Arnold Schwarzenegger.